Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Horror Analysis with me, Drew. Today we're going to dive right in to horror anthropology. Horror in or by different cultures, and focusing on, well, the religion and the history of those cultures, how the differences in those will affect the differences in the horror, really. Most of what we've talked about in history of horror was the Western world, obviously. The British tradition of horror, the American tradition of horror, the Western European tradition, France and Germany. Don't think we went even further than that. France, Germany, Spain on occasion. Did we even bother with Spain? Touch Spain? I don't know if we did. Portugal, etc. And of course the Americas. Now, we're going to contrast that and go to the opposite end. We're going to go to the Far East. I have Wikipedia's Eastern World map. This is the colors are the Far East, the quote Far East. The orange will be the South Asian area, the blue would be the Southeast Asia, and the green would be the East Asian area. And today we're going to focus on the green. We're going to focus on the East Asian area. Now, that is, of course, you can see from there, Mongolia, China, the two Koreas, and Japan. You'll see, I don't think you actually see Taiwan on there, and you don't really see Hong Kong on there either, even though Hong Kong is part of China now, again. But those will also be focused on. I'll say right away, there's nothing on Mongolia. Difficult to have anything on Mongolia. There's not a lot. I did check on it, but it didn't seem to have anything. As far as ghost stories or native things, the film industry has been very much based out of Russian influence more than Chinese influence. In Mongolian recent history. Literary history in Mongolia is light, and I didn't find anything for ghost stories. Obviously, my method of research is limited to internet searches, so it's unfortunately not all that rigorous. But I actually still have a lot to get through without having to search down Mongolian stuff. Chinese, of course, Japanese, and Korean. These are actually called by J horror, K horror, and C horror. Japanese horror for J, and just like pop. People who are nerds. If people are nerds, they know what J-pop is, or K-pop. It's Japanese pop or Korean pop. Sorry. or you're Japanese, which probably don't call it that. But anyway. So J horror would be Japanese horror, K horror would be Korean horror, and C horror would be Chinese horror. They are definitely in the Buddhist sphere of influence. I mean, they're not necessarily Buddhist countries now, but for most of the recent history has been hugely influenced by Buddhist thinking, Buddhist cosmology, and you would think that most horror as Stephen King says, most horror would be reactive, conservative to the point of being reactionary. The roots of horror run a couple hundred years deep. So, communist China, as far as horror goes, will still be in the Buddhist tradition of horror, being that was the couple hundred years beforehand. I don't know much of anything about Confucian cosmology. There might be some. I don't even know if Confucianism has a steady cosmology, or what it would entail. So I'm going to basically stick to Buddhist. It's most of the things, especially in the Japanese area, are through Buddhist. Some Shinto. It's kind of difficult to tell at some points. They sort of mix and match. It's a melting pot sort of thing. And it's not my area of expertise. It's not my milieu. Anthropology isn't in general, and I'm not really deeply involved in Japanese or Korean or Chinese culture. I've read all of Clavel's books. That's about as deep as I go. I've seen some Japanese horror movies. I've seen some Korean horror movies. I've listened to a lot of Lafcadio Hearn in the last week. But for this East Asia area, it's not my area of expertise. So, buyer beware, I guess. That being said, anyway, I'll jump into it. So, Buddhist sphere of influence came from China into Korea and Japan. I don't have the years. A long time ago. From there, it's stewed. From there, we're going to pick up with Japanese, because, a lot of the cosmology comes from China to Japan. The stories usually date back to the 1600s. The oldest stories in Japan date back to the 1600s, and they're based on Chinese stuff. But the Japanese really took off with that. A lot of what we know about it is through Lafcadio Hearn. I talked about Lafcadio Hearn when I was talking about Lovecraft, when I had supernatural horror and literature, which I don't have in front of me anymore, which is weird. It's buried under a bunch of stuff, probably. Lafcadio Hearn, let's see, he was 1850 to 1904. His dates. He was an Irishman, an Irish-Greek person who went to Japan, taught in Japan, learned Japanese things, and sort of wrote for English audiences, telling stories of Japan, telling the ghost stories of Japan, telling the big ghost stories of Japan. So most of what we know of the Western world comes from Lafcadio Hearn for the ghost stories. He wrote a book called Kwaidan, which is ghost tale. It's the older version of what Japanese call kaidan. I'm more than likely going to slaughter the pronunciation of all these words. Fair warning. Stories and Studies of Strange Things was Kwaidan. There's quite a few ghost stories in there. I actually been listening to a lot of Lefkadi Hearn. I downloaded a lot of them from LibriVox.org. All the public domain books, as I've mentioned a couple of times, are on LibriVox.org. And these are available. And actually, a lot of them are really good. So, I'm going to mention a few of them, but we're going to go back to Japan more than Lefkadi Hearn right now. I forgot about that. I'll talk about that later. Push the right buttons. In Japan, there is a certain thing that started people telling a lot of ghost stories. In Western civilization or Western culture, there's, sort of the campfire tale. It's sort of the Japanese equivalent of the campfire tale. Oh my goodness, I'm going to have to pronounce this word, aren't I? Hyakumonogatari. Hyakumonogatari. Kaidankai. No, Kaidankai. Okay. I'm going to put it up on the screen. Note to self, put it up on the screen. It was a game, sort of like a cross between Campfire Tales and the Bloody Mary or the Candyman game that people did in the dark mirror. Go into the bathroom, close the door, don't turn on the light, say Bloody Mary 100 times, and you'll see Bloody Mary's ghost appear, or something like that. Or Candyman, you have to say Candyman 5 times in the mirror with the lights off. And it comes out and kills you. It was a cross between the two. This was a storytelling parlor game. Dark fell, and all the lamps were put into one room with a big mirror, and there was 100 lamps of the Japanese paper lantern things. What were they called? They called them. I did not write down what they called them. Lamps. After dark, the people start telling ghost stories. The people at this party. It's a parlor game. And at the party, people would tell a ghost story, and then go into the room with all the lanterns, look into the mirror, and extinguish the light. So the room gets 1/100th darker. And then another person tells a ghost story. Tells the ghost story, goes in, looks in the mirror, extinguishes another lamp, down to 98. Keeps going down, 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 down. More and more ghost stories are being told. And the room keeps getting darker, and of course, as the room's getting darker, you can see, with the lanterns, you can see stuff, tricks of the light. Tricks of the light become much more possible when the lights, when there's not 100 lanterns, there's only 7. There's going to be a lot more tricks of the light with the lantern while you're looking in a mirror. And you're going to be creeped out by these tricks of light. And most people don't want to get down to 0. No one wants to get down to 1, to be the last person in there to extinguish the last light while looking in the mirror. So that involved, this Hyakumonogatari Kaidankai. What did it translate to? A gathering of 100 supernatural tales. Or Kaidan translates to strange apparition recited narrative. The Otaji? Is that the word for it? The symbol things. Not my area of expertise, as I said. There's some otakus out here that I'm sure will be jumping up and down. But Wikipedia calls it a gathering of 100 supernatural tales, and I'm good enough with that. This game became quite popular in the early to mid 1600s. And that was about the time that the printing press started getting really big in Japan. So the first ghost story book came out in 1677. The first Kaidan Shu. And then this is Wikipedia, so bear with me, folks, because of course Wikipedia is going to have conflicting numbers. So the other side of Wikipedia says that the first ghost story came out in 1666. Otogi Boko. Again, I'm going to slaughter pronunciation of these. Suffice it to say, there's several versions, several different kinds of books about ghost stories. The Kaidan itself, the ghost stories themselves, there's quite a few. There's a few notable ones. A few notable ones from Lafcadio Hearn that I really enjoyed. I'm going to share. And a couple other ones. I don't know some of these. Oh, okay. Shall I go over the ones I don't know first? Probably. Bancho Sarayashiki, The Story of Okiku, was 1916, written by Akamoto Kido. Though it dates back much further to 1741 as a play, and its origins go back even. The story goes back even further. Yatsuya Kaidan. Kaidan being Ghost Story. Ghost Story of Tokaido Yatsuya. By the author Should I just try to put these on the screen? Tsuruya Nanboku 4. 1755, 1825 play. Adapted over 30 times into film. First to bring ghosts to the masses, not just the temple and old mansions. So 1825, this guy did what I credited earlier Shirley Jackson did in the 40s and 30s and 50s. 40s and 50s. So Japan got actually a little bit of the jump on that, on us on that one, which is cool. Oh yeah, the Botan Doro. I actually had a really good version of this by Lafcadio Hearn. Botan Doro, the Peony Lantern. This one, Asai Ryoi? Sorry. A man falls in love with a woman. The woman dies. He doesn't realize she died at first. He sees her coming up to him with her servant, who also died of grief for her mistress. And they go in, they make love, and his servant peeks in on him and sees him in bed with a corpse. Or a skeleton, depending on the version. Or half and half. Lafcadio Hearn did this as passional karma. Apassional karma. And when he does, he gives an actual good Western outlook. So you see the East meets West version of things right away. Ow. That was my funny bone. Yeah, Lafcadio Hearn actually has a good commentary to go along with it, with all the footnotes as well. Very helpful. I actually really enjoyed it. Fairly frightening. I wasn't pissing myself with fear or anything, but it was pretty scary. Mugina was by Lafcadio Hearn. Apparently it was a massive mistranslation by him because Mugina means badger, and he wanted a faceless ghost, which is called Nopera Bo. It's a neat little good campfire tale of the hook type story. The ghost has I'm not going to do this, hold on. The ghost has a completely blank face. No features. Like an egg. So a woman's crying, and a guy goes and says, "Are you okay?" And she turns around and nothing. Nothing's there. That's kind of creepy. I liked it. It made me sort of jog out of my car last night when I just finished it. There's a few like that, actually. Another one was actually, I guess, more Shinto flavored, in that it was the god and the money box was stolen by a woman, so the god killed her kid. Yeah. A lot of these are more Buddhist flavored because it's someone dies and then they're instantly reincarnated as a ghost, and then either have to attack somebody else, or two souls are entwined, so even the guy falls in love with a corpse, or the guy falls in love with a ghost and then he's in bed with a corpse. It's because their karmas are intertwined for several lifetimes or whatever. Oh, yeah. And Mimi Nashi Hoichi. Hoichi the Earless. It's a folklore mythology. It was published by Lafcadio Hearn as well, in English. It was about a minstrel, a blind minstrel, who lives in a monastery and is taken care of by the priest, and gets paid on occasion to go and sing for some people. So a samurai guy goes and says, "Come and sing for my master, but you can't tell anybody that you came." And he says, "Fine." So he goes and he sings for the master, and it's so beautiful, and everybody loves it at that place. So they say, "Oh, come back tomorrow and sing it again." And the guy does, but the priest says, "Well, where were you? You were gone all night." And eventually the priest trails him, or the priest's acolytes find him in a graveyard, singing to the tombs. So the priest gets scared, says, okay, you're being seduced by, not seduced sexually, but seduced by these dead people to sing for them. What we're going to do is we're going to put a bunch of symbols on you so the ghost can't see you from Buddhist scripture. So he does, and he's invisible to the ghosts now, except for his ears, because they didn't put symbols on his ears. So the ghost rips his ears off. It was cool. It was a good story, too. I sort of ruined it a bit, but nonetheless. Yeah, I would definitely recommend Lafcadio Hearn if you haven't tried it. For the classic. This is definitely the classic, pre-film, pre-Lovecraft version of stories. Now, modern Japanese film, you have stuff like The Ring and The Grudge and The Audition, which is very influential on the Saw movies and stuff like that. So very, very much influential on us as well. That is a little bit different. It alters the cosmology. Lovecraft, as I've mentioned before, altered the cosmology. What Neil Gaiman says about Lovecraft is, pre-Lovecraft, you had the impression that you lived in a essentially just world. There was God. There were demons and other stuff, but there was a God that was looking out for you. You had to avoid the demons, and sometimes people didn't. But you had a good shot of being okay because God was looking out for you. Lovecraft turned that on its head and said, what if the gods don't give a crap? What if there's Cthulhu and... I'm just blanking on the elder gods' names. Etc. I'm blanking today. But what if they don't care if humans die? In fact, it's probably closer to their plan to have the humans die. But at best, they're ambivalent, and they don't care if demons eat you. What are you going to do now? That ambivalent or maleficent worldview is what Lovecraft inspired, and that translated to Japanese really quick, and so modern Japanese, Chinese, and Korean are going to certainly focus on that worldview, as most horror will. I think there might be religious horror still, but it's different. The Exorcist. Yeah, but yeah. So anyway, moving on. Modern horror. We're going to switch it up a bit. Sorry, am I on this one? No. Done with that one too. The modern Japanese is going to be more centered on scares, which is typical. But the worldview isn't, the same Buddhist worldview as the reincarnation, the Buddhist reincarnation of souls into... Oh, I forgot the name. It should be on this one. Yokai? Is that the ghost? No, that's not the ghost. Yurei. Or both. Yokai. It does say yokai in some of these. It's not the same. Well, let's see. The Japanese reincarnation is still going to fit. The Japanese don't have so much of a problem with the worldview needing to be benevolent like Western culture did for most of its existence. Pre-Lovecraft. But there are... I'm throwing myself off here. Come on, Drew, what am I thinking of? To this side. It's probably more Western influence in general coming over. Lovecraft is Western influence. Of course, Japanese modern horror began with Godzilla, Gojira, which is, of course, very Western influenced because it had to do with nuclear energy or nuclear weapons, which, of course, was a Western influence on Japan, being that there's atomic bombs dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Hiroshima. I always pronounce that wrong, too. There was a... Oh, I don't want to get that far into philosophy of art. Okay, so one of the ones I like from modern Japanese horror is a Japanese horror comedy called Tokyo Zombie. It's a zombie apocalypse type movie. Zombies come back to life and start biting on people, etc. It's definitely horde zombie type thing. Slow moving, but this doesn't matter. And that sort of Night of the Living Dead traces back to... No, it's a horror comedy. I guess Shaun of the Dead? I don't know. I want to say that. It's a horror comedy in its own right. From Night of the Living Dead, George Romero era. George Romero, of course, you get a straight line back to Lovecraft because you don't get Night of the Living Dead from a pre-Lovecraftian worldview. You might get it from Matheson in between as a stepping stone, but I think you could go straight back to the Lovecraftian point that Neil Gaiman was making about the worldview. Tea. Lovely. Okay, so, and then... Japanese horror is just such a rich tradition. I think I'm going to go on to that. So we have some notables, of course, Gojira, The Ring, the Japanese version of The Ring, the Japanese version of The Grudge, Ju-on and Ringu. The Audition, which was very influential on the Saw movies. Actually, I'll point this one out since I'm here. There was a documentary done by Discovery Channel. It is available on YouTube. True Asian Horror is the title of it. There's two different links here. This goes over Japanese and Korean horror. There is one that goes over Indonesian, Thai, and Chinese. That's True Asian Horror Part 2. But this one goes over Japanese and Korean horror and into a lot more depth than I'm able to go into it. Now, this is a good segue to get into Korean horror. Korean horror is going to be a little bit different than Japanese horror. It's going to focus more... Well, this is actually Wikipedia's point, but I do agree with it. I'm even more limited on Korean horror in general than Japanese. I've only seen a few movies. The best, of course, being Tale of Two Sisters. I recommend that one to pretty much everybody. Now, Japanese, the Wikipedia article on K-horror, or Korean horror, I'll just give you a direct quote. Many of the Korean horror films tend to focus on the suffering and the anguish of characters rather than focus on the explicit blood and guts aspect of horror. It's a nice little blurb, and it sort of fits comparing Japanese and Korean horror. Japanese would be more scare-oriented. Korean would be more atmospheric. The emotional aspects much more in play in Korean horror. Perfect example being Tale of Two Sisters. Female ghost, but you know what? Female ghosts are in both sides of the... So, okay, female ghost. When a woman is full of resentment, she will bring frost in May and June. The Korean expression. There's a tradition of female ghosts. There's a tradition of female ghosts pretty much in every culture. I don't know. I'm not sure how much I buy that as being a Korean aspect. Let's see what we have here. Tale of Two Sisters, of course, being a very influential one. Whispering Corridor is not one I've seen. Pardon me. Right. And then directors. Neat little article. Actually, the Korean horror, the Japanese horror, and the Chinese horror all have neat little articles in on Wikipedia. I will skip to... I have even less information on Chinese. There was... The Chinese version on Wikipedia says that, like Korean, it doesn't focus so much on the blood and guts aspect that Japanese stuff does. The eye, I think, is the biggest one that's done through Chinese. Let's see, hold on a second. What do we have here? The Eye, the Pang brothers. Oh, and Chinese are known for more comedic elements in their horror. Bio-Zombie, Troublesome Night, The Vampire Who Admires Me, The Left Eye Sees Ghost. and then it goes into talking about a certain kind of monster called the Chinese hopping vampires. Jingxi. Yeah, I guess all of these will have similar but slightly differing monster types. Oh, there was one, The Eater of Dreams was a short story I read of Leocadio Hearn's, listened to in the car today. It was chimeric. It was a lion-faced horse's body, and there are other things going on. It spoke in a human voice. It had a snout of a rhino with the horns, I'm assuming. Very interesting, and it ate bad dreams. That was its purpose. So if you have a bad dream, you're supposed to say, "Hey, monster thing, come and eat my dreams," as sort of a to ward off bad omens. I forget what it was called, but it was a good one. If you go to LibriVox.org, go to Leocadio Hearn, you'll find quite a few good things. Actually, that was one of his originals. That wasn't necessarily based on an old Japanese tale. So, alright, so for Asia in general, I'm going to next go over Southeast Asia. That's going to be my next video. Again, I apologize for not being as exacting as I should be. I feel that I'm letting myself down and letting you guys down for not being up on my anthropology. But I've not done anthropology. I've never taken a class on anthropology, and I'm now teaching a portion of a course on anthropology. That's kind of weird for me. Someone else can take what I'm doing, tell me what I'm doing wrong, and fix it, and I'll be happy to take that class. So next time I'm going to go over this blue section, the Southeast Asian area, and then I'll be switching on to the orange being the South Asian. The Southeast Asian will also be heavily Buddhist influenced in Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, which has less of a flourishing filmmaking industry, but certainly has some. And then the Philippines and Indonesia are going to be mixed between Buddhist influence and Muslim influence, Islamic influence. And Islamic influence is going to be very interesting, and we'll of course go into that more when we go into South Asia. This should be a lot of fun. I'm really hoping it is. So next time, Southeast Asia. Time after that, South Asia. Pardon. I'll continue with horror anthropology. Thanks for watching, folks. Have a great night. See you next time on Horror Analysis.